Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to look at the Celsius ERC20 smart contract. Um, let's jump into it. So here we are on the GitHub page for the Celsius network. This is the Celsius token. It was last committed in 2018 on April 16th. And let's take a quick look through it. There's about 400 lines of code, so we're going to go a bit fast through it all. We're going to skip over some bits that are pretty stock standard and point out a few noteworthy aspects when we come across them. So the top here, this is just the Solidity version. I'm not too sure why there's three. I imagine this could be needed for some reason. It's also important to note this is an older version of Solidity. I think right now we're at 0.87, I believe, at the time of recording this. Don't quote me on that, but this is an older version, so I won't be surprised if we see some older features of Solidity being used. But that's not to worry. That's to be expected when you use an older version. So first up, we've got an interface defined here, which is a contract of type token, which is a pretty stock standard ERC20 interface. We define total supply, balance of, transfer from, and approve functions, as well as allowance, and two events, so a transfer event and an approval event. And these get emitted whenever these transfer event happens or an approval event happens. So that's pretty standard. It's just an interface. And then as we go down below here, we'll see another, this is a library, a safe math library, which is used in pretty much every smart contract that uses some sort of math operations. So doing a safe addition, safe subtraction, and safe multiplication. I believe the last pass I did of this contract before this video, this is used quite a bit. Safe sub is also used, and safe multiply is not used at all. So it's probably just a copy and paste, and then they didn't refactor this and remove this method. But if you basically do Control F for a find on this page, you see it's only defined right here. So you know, a little bit of unused code that could have been removed. And if we do the same for safe sub, we can see it's 6 occurrences, and the safe add, it's got about 3. So we'll see that as we go down in the contract below. So we've got an abstract contract here defined, which inherits from these interfaces or implements these interfaces that we saw. So it inherits the safe math contract, and then it implements the token interface. As we'll see, it actually implements the functions that are defined. So there's that. It defines a constructor here, which, as you can see from the comment, does nothing. Implements the balance of function, pretty standard. It is a little confusing that this counts a state variable, I think, is defined down here. It is a little bit backwards in a way. Like most of the time you have your state variables defined at the top, but it is what it is. It's a readability issue. It's not a code issue. A little bit of nitpicking, but hey, it's all, if you can't read the code, then it's, it does make it harder to navigate, but hey, it's personal preference. So uses the accounts variable and returns the balance of the given address. Pretty standard. Transfer function, which transfers from an address to another address given the value. So it looks pretty stock standard as well. Nothing stands out there. It does omit the transfer event, and if you are aware of the latest Solidity changes, it does use the older version of that event emission. So rather than having the emit keyword, it uses just transfer. But in newer versions, it has the emit and then the event. So something to point out there. But this will still work perfectly fine. There's nothing that, there's nothing to call out there. That still works perfectly fine in this older version. Transfer from, also pretty stock standard function that doesn't do a whole lot. Approve and allowance, and that's pretty much it. But there's nothing too exciting going on there. Probably the most exciting bit is in the Celsius token here, the contract here, which implements this abstract token contract that we saw up here. This is where the meat of the contract is. So we define the private address of the owner. So it's the owner of the smart contract, which we'll see in the constructor down here, gets set to the message sender. So that's the person that deployed this contract. We've got a token count, and we've got a variable here, which is the frozen. And this is where it gets interesting a little bit. So this is the variable that's used to essentially freeze the tokens if it's set. We'll see that later down in this contract as we get down there, but it's something to point out. So we've got the constructor here, which, as we mentioned, the owner gets set when this contract gets deployed. Token count gets also set, and then we have accounts, and that gets that sets the owner of this contract equal to the token count that gets passed in. So stock standard, supplier name, symbol, decimals, functions. Transfer function as well, just pretty standard. But the bit where it sort of doesn't get standard is this frozen check. I was a bit surprised to see this. So this is essentially a flag which can get set. And if it is set, then you can't move your tokens at all. So by default, it's false, meaning that the tokens aren't frozen. But if it does get set in a function down below, then whenever you call this transfer function, you can't do anything. It will basically return false and prevent you from calling the implementation of the transfer function. Same thing in the transfer from, it's got the same flag. And also, the approved one doesn't have that because that doesn't initiate an actual transfer function. Burn doesn't have that check either. And also this function here, the set owner, this is kind of, in a way, it could be used for malicious purposes. If someone in Celsius does have the ability to call this function, they could pass in their own address and basically take over ownership of this contract. It does obviously depend on a lot of how Celsius Network control the private key of the owner address of this account, since it does that check of the owner. Something to keep in mind for that. And this is the freeze transfer function that we mentioned before. So obviously only the owner of this contract can call it, and then it does a check on the flag. So if it's not frozen, then it sets frozen equal to true, and then it emits a frozen event. Now this could be put in for multiple reasons. It's all speculation as to why this was added to the contract. At the time of recording this, Celsius Network doesn't seem to be malicious in any way. They are a pretty successful company, and there isn't any indication that this is added for malicious reasons. Most likely, if I was to speculate, it would probably be for regulatory reasons, if they had to cease operations for some reason. And obviously there's an unfreeze transfer function as well down here, which undoes the freeze call. And then we've got the events that we mentioned before as well. So that's pretty much it. The Celsius Network contract, pretty stock standard, and also a few things to call out, notably the set owner function, which could change the owner of the contract at some point in the future, and then the freeze function. So that's pretty much it. If you have any other smart contracts that you want us to look at, let us know, and we'll take a look. See you all in the next one.